Welcome to Let's Talk Thyroid, where we explore different aspects of living a healthy thyroid lifestyle, positively and practically, to help you thrive and not just survive. Join me, Annabel Bateman, your host, and let's talk thyroid. This podcast has been proudly supported by, me. I am fully backing my podcast and getting the Let's Talk Thyroid message out to you. If you are interested in purchasing essential oils, that is one of the ways that you can support me and I can support you, and essential oils can support your overall thyroid health and wellness. So if that's something that you would like to add to your health and wellness toolkit of resources that you can access to support you in a number of different ways, send me a message. I'd love to help you find what suits your individual needs and budget. Or you can head to annabelbateman.com and follow the links there to essential oils. Think digestive support, stress management, reducing your toxic load, all sorts of ways that we can use essential oils as part of our overall lifestyle approach to managing health and wellness. So, are you a turkey or a frog? Which is a bit of a weird way to start a podcast about going gluten-free, but hopefully all will be revealed as we dive in. If you didn't catch part 1, then go back to part 1, which is episode 10, where we cover the why, where, and what of going gluten-free. Why should you even bother? Where do you find it if you decide you want to avoid it? And what on earth is left to eat? So that's part 1. Part 2 is how do we actually do it? Give us some practical tips, Annabel, because it seems a bit hard. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through meal by meal, how I approach eating gluten-free. I'm going to give you some practical examples. I'm going to give you some tips around being gluten-free when you're traveling, if that is ever possible again, when you're out and about, maybe if you take your lunch to work. And we're going to actually talk then about our personalities and whether you should take a turkey or a frog approach to giving up gluten. But right from the get-go, here is my number 1 tip, and that is make a decision. So whether that decision is to give it up 100%, to ease into it, to do it for a certain period of time, just make a decision, because that takes out all of then the meal by meal, cake by cake, sandwich by sandwich decision-making process. So even if it's you decide for a week you're going to go gluten-free, making a decision actually takes out a whole lot of other decisions, and that helps to reduce anxiety, overwhelm, and I was talking about this actually in my Pilates session this morning, because the ladies were talking about this amazing bakery that's just up the road from where I live, and they really do pretty amazing bakery pastries and breads, and I said, benefit of being gluten-free is I don't have to go in there and debate whether I'm going to have a vanilla slice or a almond croissant. I just know that I can't eat any of it, and actually that's okay with me. That having made that decision just means it actually is a cafe that I pretty rarely go to for that reason, and that's okay, because there are plenty of other places I can go that have options, great gluten-free options, but I don't have that constant, am I going to have this? Have I eaten healthily for the rest of the day? I don't have that whole debate going on in my mind all the time about will I eat this when I eat this, because the decision's been made. So that's my number 1 tip from the get-go. So now let's dive into how do we actually have a gluten-free diet on a meal-by-meal basis. So obviously number 1 is know where gluten's found. So we covered that in episode 10. Then you need to have a plan. It is difficult, particularly if you're transitioning from eating gluten to not eating it. It is tricky to do that without a plan, without some deliberate forethought, some making sure that you've got ingredients in the home that you know you can eat, perhaps removed the ingredients that you don't want to eat if that's a temptation. So definitely you want to have a plan. You also need to be inspired. Use this as a fun opportunity to try new recipes, get online. There's like a gazillion awesome recipes. I tend to search for paleo recipes as opposed to gluten-free recipes, because I know then that it's also grain-free, and for me that's generally better. And so, you know, I like trying new recipes from time to time. You know, buy a new cookbook if you need to do that. I know where you can get a good one. What Annabel Cooks is a really great one to start with. But there are lots of other great ones too. Have fun with it. Don't see this as a negative experience, as a punishment. Yeah, just see it as a fun new adventure, and get support. It's definitely important to have support from your family and friends. And I think this is, you know, I might cover this again later, but part of that is actually telling people. And I don't mean you have to broadcast it all over Facebook or walk in the door saying I'm now gluten-free, but I do think it is helpful to tell people, because if you are going to someone's home and you know you would normally eat gluten and now you're changing, it is helpful to make it known that you're no longer eating gluten, or that you're doing, you know, you're trialing giving it up for health reasons. But however you want to word that, it is helpful if other people know, so that you're not in the position where you've turned up to someone's house and they've cooked Italian and you've got pasta and garlic bread and tiramisu and nothing to eat. So that's where it is helpful for other people to know. And I'll cover some tips on eating out and travel in a little bit. But let's look at it meal by meal. And this is how I approach pretty much meal by meal. So and this is really whether it's breakfast, lunch or dinner, actually. I think probably breakfast can be the hardest meal to do gluten-free if you're used to, you know, cereal and toast. But it doesn't have to be. It's just a matter of rethinking breakfast. And actually in my cookbook, I go through a number of different breakfast recipes. I'm just trying to find breakfast. Here we go. And I actually go through just some tips on rethinking breakfast, like eating leftovers. So often I will deliberately make too much dinner, and that is so that I have leftovers either for breakfast or lunch. Often Lee's the one that gets the leftovers, and I've got to say now the boys are all bigger and teenagers. I've got to cook a lot more dinner to get the leftovers. So, you know, that's getting a little bit tougher, but that's just I have to be a bit more deliberate. Having a quick egg omelette is a really great idea for breakfast. Or a fry-up if you've got some leftovers, you know, even salad veggies that are cookable. You know, you could toss them in a fry pan, crack in an egg, sprinkle some salt and pepper, maybe some chili flakes. Quick and easy breakfast. Eggs does not have to be a big, long process. It can definitely be done in 5 to 10 minutes, probably under 5 minutes, really. You could also have a smoothie for breakfast. There are some protein powders that you can buy. It depends on whether you're trying to avoid dairy or not, but there, you know, you can find a protein powder, you mix it with some frozen fruits and lots of leafy greens. So that would be another option for breakfast. In winter, you can have soup, which sounds a bit weird, but I do have a recipe for a breakfast soup in my cookbook. And of course, one of the recipes I get asked for a lot actually is my muesli recipe, and I actually have about, I think at least 3 versions on whatannabelcooks.com. So if you're looking for a really, really yummy muesli, like a cereal, you could have it just on yogurt, or you can have it with milk. I've even warmed it up in winter if you want. It's not quite porridge, but if you wanted like a warm cereal. And it's really made from, you know, nuts, seeds, coconut. I do put a little bit of dried fruit in after it's been cooked, but you don't have to do that if you're really watching your sugar intake. But it has that nice crunch. It's delicious. It's super easy to make. So if you really still want that cereal breakfast, then I highly recommend giving one of those recipes a go. When it comes to, I guess, your more traditional meals like lunch, dinner, or if you're rethinking breakfast, first thing I think of is, what protein am I going to use? You know, what am I using? Eggs? Am I using chicken? You know, beef, pork, lamb, fish, whatever kind of protein. So that's what I first think. And then I think, well, what am I going to serve with that? And really, if you go back to thinking meat and 3 veg, you can't really go too far wrong. And then I will usually add a carb element for the kids. Not that I don't eat carbs. For me, my approach to food is not low carb specifically, but often when you're cutting out the gluten, and or grains, then by default you reduce the carb intake. But I love sweet potato, so I tend to cook quite a lot with sweet potato, so I'm getting my carbs. But I will usually add pasta or rice for the kids to pad it out. I've got 3 teenage boys, so they need a lot of filling, they need a lot of energy, and so I do add that for them. But usually I'll have the meal without that. So I think, what protein am I going to have? What what vegetables will I have with it? And what fat will I cook with? So if you haven't heard, I'm sure you probably have, fat is back. Fat is not the enemy. I cook a lot with macadamia oil, and I buy it by the 20-litre drum. So then I'm not constantly at the shops buying oil. I'm very blessed to have in-laws that have an avocado farm. So when it's avocado season and we've been up the coast to see them, we have a lot of avocados. So I love avocados, and they're really great fats. I do use butter, coconut oil, and a bit of olive oil. That's pretty much what I cook with. So definitely don't be afraid of fat. And then I think, well, what vegetables will I use? And, am I wanting to roast vegetables, stir fry them, eat them raw? How am I going to have that? And when I'm really, I suppose, in the zone, and I go through stages as well, I'm normal. I don't, love everyday cooking every day. But I do like to get to the markets, and I do like to try different vegetables and see what's in season, what's different colours, really. I mean, these are all the basics that I'm sure we all know, but it is, it's easy just not to do it, to know what to do, but don't do it. And I do that a lot. So know that eating the rainbow and eating variety is really important. So some of my tips, I guess, to ensure that we're doing that is start with your leafy greens and get a variety. Try the different shapes, different colours. I mean, I know I've just said green is a colour, but, there are deeper greens and lighter greens. There's like your rainbow chard that's got the different coloured stems. And usually I have trouble finding those in the regular fruit and veggie shops. I do definitely get those from my local organic markets because it adds colour, and you can finely chop them and it adds texture. So mix them up. And here's a tip with kale, because I know kale has had a bit of a bad rap. It's not, it can be a bit unpalatable, let's be real. But here's a tip for you you want to peel the leaves off the stem. You don't really want to eat the stem, it's pretty hard. And I finely chop it so that I've not got big chunks of kale. And then if you put a bit of olive oil, and I then like to add a drop or two of lemon essential oil. So probably about a so I've got a big bowl of shredded kale, about a tablespoon of olive oil, a drop, maybe 2 of lemon essential oil in my hands, and then I just rub my hands together and scrunch or massage the kale. Sounds a bit weird, but it actually softens it, and that, it gives it a lovely dressing at the same time. So that's a really it's a way of making kale, particularly in a salad, so it's raw, a bit softer, a bit more palatable, and a bit tastier. So the other thing, I live in Queensland. It's pretty much summer here most of the year round, so we do tend to eat a lot of salads. So one of the ways I like to mix it up is to just chop the vegetables in a different way. So if you usually, if you usually dice your carrot, try shredding it. Or using a julienne peeler. You could try spiralising. Do you remember the spiralisers? They were pretty in a few years ago when the cookbook was launched. I'm sure they're still easily available. So just changing the way you cut or prepare the vegetables can add a different texture and mouthfeel and look. Definitely you want to go for colour. I like adding crunch to my salad, so think things like nuts, seeds, buckwheat, snow peas. You could even finely chopped snow peas, just add that nice crunch. Mixing your smooth textures like your avocado with your crunchy textures of your nuts and seeds. Could have a warm, like a warm salad where you roast some beetroot and sweet potato, even some carrots, and toss it through with some kale or English spinach. So you're just getting, it's mixing it up, I suppose. Even adding from time to time a little bit of sweet to your salads, like a bit of mango in the summer or, say, currants in the winter. So just, it really is just about experimenting and making it different. So that's you could take that approach to breakfast or lunch, and making enough often so that you don't have to be remaking it all the time. You can make up a whole big salad that you then have in different meals. In fact, actually last week Mum and Dad were visiting and I did have actually a whole kale that I hadn't really used. And I thought, gosh, I've really got to come on, Annabel, practice what you preach. I chopped it all up, didn't massage it because that you've really then got to eat that then. Chopped it all up. I shredded some carrot and some purple cabbage and put it in a big plastic bag in the fridge. And honestly, I said undressed. That felt like that kale salad lasted for the entire week. And Mum, who's recently actually been diagnosed with Hashimoto's and is doing super well with cutting out, gluten, grains, dairy, sugar. She's being amazing. She's like, every morning for breakfast, she'd fry up a bit of the kale salad and have it with an egg, and then she'd have it with lunch, and then she'd have it with dinner. So it seemed to be this never-ending kale salad. So just having that as a base, something like that as a base in the fridge that you can just pull out a handful of is quite helpful. Now, when it comes to snacks, often what I find is when I am really eating, in this paleo style, I don't tend to need snacks as much. I tend to go for the snacks when when probably some more of the carbs have kicked in, or maybe not being as strict on the grain-free. But that's just my observation. But I guess my go-to snacks would be things like jerky. I really find I love that for a high-protein snack. I have made it in my dehydrator. Chicken jerky, which sounds gross, but actually is really tasty. In fact, I probably should need to make that again soon. Beef jerky, which I tend to buy now. But just be aware because a lot of the jerkies do have aren't gluten-free, depending on what spices or marinades they've had on them. Boiled eggs, smoothies, fruit, a handful of nuts. If you're looking for a sweeter snack, something like the bliss balls or protein balls, you can call them whatever you like. Again, there's multiple recipes for those on what Annabel Cooks are in my cookbook. And you don't have to make them into balls. I've kind of given up with that, to be honest. I blitz up, fresh dates, nuts, coconut. Again, it's a bit similar to the muesli. It just depends on what I've got. Usually with cacao and a few drops of peppermint. I tend to make that choc mint flavour. That's Lee's favourite. And you can just roll it out in a slice tin, pop it in the fridge or the freezer, cut it up into pieces. That's a bit less labour intensive than rolling them into balls. But, it depends on what you want to do. If you're looking for gluten-free, obviously you can look at your gluten-free cakes, slices. But again, I guess depends if you're replacing or, looking for alternatives. But they're there, and if you're out and you want to have a treat, then, that's a better option than picking your wheat-based cake or slice. Rice crackers and rice cakes, I find I do use a fair bit, unless I'm being really strictly grain-free, but, I find those just with a bit of peanut butter or nut butter that, nice and crunchy. They're not that filling, but if you're wanting that crunch or that little bit of toast kind of idea, then I find that is quite helpful. So there's some really, hopefully some practical tips on what to actually eat. So let's now have a chat about whether you are a turkey or a frog and how either one of those might work best for you. So if you're wanting to transition to a gluten-free diet, I've worked out that it really probably depends on your personality and whether you want to go cold turkey or whether you want to take the frog in a pot approach. So I'm going to explain both of those, and really it's just then a matter of deciding for you. I think for me, I am a bit of an all or nothing person. I found when I finally, after years of flirting with gluten-free, gave it up, I did go cold turkey. I did a 30-day challenge, like where I cut out gluten, grains, dairy, sugar. Went pretty hardcore for 30 days and then really never went back to the gluten. So that works for my personality, but I do know that doesn't work for everyone. That can be more stressful for some people. So here's for me the tips for going cold turkey. So one of it is to, like I said at the beginning, make a decision. Make a decision that you're just going to stop. And I would say consider going grain-free too, but that again is another choice for you. Set an initial time frame. Now, my suggestion is you try it for at least a month, because it does take time for our bodies to adjust to not having to process gluten. And I'm pretty sure it was in Grain Brain that Dr. David Perlmutter says that your body can actually respond to gluten for up to 6 months after you've had some. So the longer you can go without it, the better. But most elimination diets tend to operate on a 30-day time frame. So I don't know, that's what worked for me. You can dig into research as to time frames if that's what you want to do, but having a time frame is helpful because, like I said, that just takes out the decision making and the overwhelm, and you can just get on and do it. Be organized. You definitely need to be well stocked at home. You need to tell people, like I said before. You can then decide whether, say, after that 30 days or time frame, whether you want to reintroduce it and see how you feel or not. I mean, that's really a decision for you. It's definitely you want to invest into your knowledge as to why you're wanting to go gluten-free if you haven't done that already, because it's not easy, particularly that first week or two. It's really not. That's why often it is a challenge. But having made that decision helps. And if you know why, then it just helps you get through those tough days. Decide on having a treat. Whatever that is for you, have something so that you're not feeling totally deprived. For me, that has pretty much always been that I've been able to have a coffee. I can make myself a nice coffee at home, or I can go out and enjoy a cappuccino. It might be that once a week you're going to have a massage. It might be that you just buy fresh flowers for yourself when, once a week. It could be that you're going to go sit outside at lunchtime in the sun for 15 minutes and read a book. Whatever it is, whatever is a treat for you, then decide on that and actually do it. Because actually give yourself that little reward, because it really is a mental game. It's changing the way we think, our approach to food, while the body's undergoing, the changes of not having it. It's also a mental game. So the people that tend to probably respond better to going cold turkey is if you're like me and you have a bit of that all or nothing personality. For people who like a challenge, if your gut health is not good, it really isn't good, like that, then you might be better off just cutting it out cold turkey. And giving it a good break. So I think Sharon Wilford, in my interview with her, said she tends to find that her clients that are the sickest tend to take the most drastic action and get the best results. So I suppose that's for everybody to decide where you fit into that. Alternatively, you've got the frog in the pot approach. You're probably all familiar with the idea of if you popped a frog into hot water, it jumps straight out, but you put the frog in the pot, gradually boil up the water and the frog cooks. So this is the slow and steady approach. Again, requires making a decision. You still want to decide, I'm going to transition to a gluten-free diet. Give yourself, again, a time frame to do that. And set yourself... I still think it's helpful to set yourself some boundaries. So you know, well, I'm going to replace one meal at a time or one product at a time. Maybe if you want that more moderate approach, then you might want to look at more of your gluten-free alternatives like the bread and the pasta rather than cutting them out altogether. That might be an easier transition. Spend some time hanging out in the health food aisle and trialing some different products that are in there. Again, still investing your knowledge as to why it's important. You still want to decide on a treat. Still give yourself a reward. Still think of something that is going to make you feel good. Feel good having had that bit of a reward. I think it's important if you're taking the slow and steady approach that you need to accept you might not feel the difference as much as if you were doing cold turkey. It just might take longer. You might not actually notice the difference because if you're still having some gluten, then your body is not having a break from processing it. So give it a go, and if you don't feel that it's made enough difference, then you might want to look at speeding up that process. So the slow and steady approach would probably work best for people who don't have major gut or health issues, that you're just wanting to tweak things a bit. Perhaps you need time to get your head around the concept of going gluten-free and what that means for you. Perhaps you need to dig more into the research, but you're happy to start, on the journey. And it probably also suits those people whose personality can do moderation. That can do a little bit, but not a lot. So there's just some basic tips on that, how to approach it. I just want to highlight a couple of things now about eating out and travel to give you some tips for that. So actually, I think we covered eating out last week in the What Can You Eat? But just as a tip, look ahead at restaurants. If you're really going somewhere that you think is going to be really tricky, then maybe you want to phone them and ask what the options are if it's not obvious from the website. Generally, it's much easier now. But some tips for travel, assuming that we can, you might be listening to this when we're not in the middle of COVID and we can't really travel much, but these are some of the things I've found helpful over the years of traveling, eating gluten-free. So one is just accept that I'm going to have a better holiday if I feel well. So I don't want to throw all of my eating out the window. I know that I don't want to spend my holiday feeling bloated and looking for a toilet. So following gluten, for me, that's following gluten-free. That's my bare minimum when I'm traveling or even eating out is I'll compromise on the other things, but not the gluten-free. I do like to often stay places where there's a kitchen. That gives you a little bit more free range, at least for cooking breakfast. Often it's cheaper to do that too than to eat out every meal. And I love exploring supermarkets in other countries and places. I don't know, maybe I'm just a bit weird, but I love that. I like looking at the different brands and the packaging, so I'm quite happy to try different things and take them home and cook them. So you might want to even look for a local farmers market that's on. Pack a cold bag. Take a cold bag with you so that you've got a few staples at least. And if you're traveling on a plane or landing somewhere that you think you won't have easy access to food, at least for a day or so, you can pack snacks. Depending, and I guess then it depends on where you can take them in overseas. But definitely for the plane, definitely take different snacks, maybe some bars or muesli or something like that, some jerky. That can be quite helpful on when you're traveling. pick your battles, really. You still want to have a holiday. It's not about being miserable or feeling deprived on a holiday, but just knowing what your options are. And different countries is easier than others. Like I found Japan much harder to be gluten-free than, for example, Vietnam. That's probably my favourite place to have travelled from a gluten-free point of view. Vietnam, the food, basically there is no gluten. Very rarely. It's all rice-based and fish sauce-based, not soy sauce-based. So much, that was really a joy, actually, to travel to Vietnam. Japan was harder. I think I probably did end up eating gluten there, inadvertently. But yeah, anyway, and do some research. I mean, before all of those places, I've definitely got online and looked up how to be gluten-free. Different celiac websites have cards that you can download in the local language that set out, that says I can't eat gluten and where it's found, in the local language. So that can be helpful to show people if you're travelling in far-flung places. But for now, most of us aren't travelling very far, but maybe we're getting away for a weekend locally within our, within a radius of where we're going. And so some of those tips still count. You still want to plan ahead. You probably still, it can be helpful to look for somewhere to stay that has a kitchen or at least a fridge, and, you can take a few basic supplies with you. Some of my favourite go-tos, so even for whether I'm at home or travelling, would be things like hot smoked salmon. I really like. That feels really special. It's a bit of a splurge, particularly if you get the really good stuff. It's a nice protein. I can mix it through a salad. You can have it on, crackers or a slice of apple, for, with a drink. That's a nice, easy thing to do. What else do I like for on the go? Fruit and nut mix definitely is handy, just to put it in a little Ziploc bag and have it in your handbag. Jerky, like I said before. So, there's lots of little bits and pieces that you can do when you're out and about and on the go. So there you have it. If you might well have some tips that you can share. I'd love to hear them if you're in my Thyroid Facebook group, or if you're not, come and join us there. It's just called Let's Talk Thyroid with Annabel Bateman. You'll find it on Facebook. Join. There's always a link in the show notes. But that's a fun, interactive way. I'd love to learn from you as well as share my tips and tricks. The other thing just to know is sometimes, it's good to do these things in a group, with the support of other people. And so I will be running my... I think I'm going to call it the Wellness Lifestyle Kickstarter, formerly known as 30-Day Challenge, which I'm starting to think sounds a little bit boring. So I am planning on running that in September. So stay tuned shortly for more information about that. It's lots of fun. I mean, we do a little bit more than gluten-free, but it could be a good opportunity to dive right in and kickstart some new ways of eating. So have a fabulous week, everyone, and I'll see you next Thyroid Thursday. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Thyroid. I would love it if you would subscribe to the podcast and share it with others that you know with thyroid problems. Let's get the message out there. If you'd like to connect with me further, the best place to do that is via my website, annabelbateman.com. From there, you'll be able to join my Facebook group, book a strategy session with me, download my freebie, and access any show notes for this episode. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
The information presented and discussed in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease and should not be used as a substitute for proper advice from a qualified professional.